have to start with the NBA playoffs and specifically two of the number one seeds because the 2-1-4 matchups that we got between the Phoenix Suns and the Dallas Mavericks and the Miami Heat and the Philadelphia 76ers, these are starting to turn into some really, really fun basketball series, both tied at 2 apiece. The Mavericks protected home court over the weekend. They won game 4 yesterday, 111-101. Philadelphia 76ers, they did as well. They protected home court. They won the second and the fourth overall game of the series on their home floor, 116-108. So we've got 2-2 series between the top seeds in the West and in the East against the 4 seeds. But I'll touch on the kind of struggles of Chris Paul and how incredible Luka Doncic has been in the Suns and Mavericks series in a little bit, because I do think that it is important to talk about. But the question is, which one of these number one seeds is truly in more trouble? And to me, again, even though Chris Paul has struggled as of late in the last couple of games, to me, it clearly belongs to the Miami Heat. I'm going to explain why. When you look at where the kind of, if the compass was going to swing and was going to oscillate in a different direction, which series and which reason is going to be the bigger impetus for that swing? To me, it's Joel Embiid's return with the 76ers. That, to me, is the biggest reason why the Miami Heat and the Philadelphia 76ers, why that series looks perhaps like it could be more destined to swing and tilt in the direction of the Philadelphia 76ers than perhaps a game of which team's role players are going to maximize home court a little bit better and shoot the ball well when they're at home versus when they're on the road, which to me is kind of the bigger story and takeaway from the Suns and the Mavericks is the role players have just been playing better at home, and that's what we expect. Role players typically play better at home than they do on the road. So the return of Joel Embiid is the bigger compass swing in the direction of the series to me, because the entire game plan and the approach to what the Miami Heat have had to do and prepare for against the Philadelphia 76ers, it's completely changed with the reassertion of Joel Embiid into this series. They had to completely efface their previous game plan, throw it all out in the garbage, and start anew. Because the way, the bevy of ways that he manipulates the game, and what we've already seen in the way that Miami has attacked the 76ers in the first 2 games versus the way that the 76ers have responded in the last 2 because of his presence, offensively, it's innumerable, because primarily he creates more freedom of space on the floor for James Harden to operate. That's the biggest key. James Harden's got all this space now to kind of to dance on guys, to get open shots, because we've seen he's been slowing down. And of course, he drops his arguably his best game as a Philadelphia 76er. 31 points, 7 rebounds, 9 assists, including several clutch threes down the stretch and in the fourth quarter. He had 16 points in the fourth quarter. In the previous 3 games, James Harden had a total of 10 points in the fourth quarters of the first 3 games, as opposed to 16 in game 4. And why? Why is that? Well, instead of, first of all, having to operate one-on-one every single time in Miami, and instead of trying to run pick and roll and get a switch where Joel Embiid or a potential big would have the advantage down low, James Harden, if he switched onto a Jimmy Butler. Kyle Lowry is switching onto him. You have PJ Tucker switching onto him. The Heat have length that was disrupting him in the first 2 games of the series because he couldn't break free and he couldn't kind of unhinge himself against those guys. Well, now that he's able to operate a little bit more freely, we're seeing a better version of James Harden. And instead of a guy who looked to be deteriorating before our very eyes, and a guy who you were really contemplating and trying to rationally find some reasons to convince yourself to offer the max contract to him this offseason, now he looks like a guy who's an all-star, where it doesn't need quite as much convincing. And you can kind of wrap your arms around giving this guy a max contract in the setting that he's in if he's playing like this. Makes a little bit more sense. You can wrap your mind around that at this stage of his career. But that turn and his ability to free himself up, now it opens the floor for all the other guys. And that's why this is creating such a seismic shift in the ground for the Philadelphia 76ers. They've got a much stronger foothold in this series because Miami Heat have no defensive answer for Joel Embiid. As great as Bam Adebayo is, as versatile as he is, as elite of a defensive player as he is, and he is all of those things, he doesn't maintain the same girth, the same height, the same length to really disrupt Joel Embiid's shot inside. And that's why, to me, now you're seeing guys like Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris and Danny Green. These guys are able to get to the rim. They're getting more open shots. Is because now Bam can't really switch on to them and shut them down. He's got to stay locked to Embiid. He's pulling him away from those two or those three or four other guys on the perimeter for the 76ers. So offensively, we're seeing the impact, not to mention, obviously, what he brings you offensively. And again, despite the fact that the guy is playing through an orbital fracture, a torn labrum in his shooting hand, the guy can do everything. He's been hitting the mid-range. He's been collecting rebounds, providing Philly with extra possessions, spacing the floor better for the entire team, providing a little bit more depth for the team. So that way the starters aren't having to be extended quite as much. But then defensively, and this is the aspect of Joel Embiid that I think people don't give him enough credit for, all those wide open looks, all those shots that Miami Heat was sinking in the first two games. I'm not saying that Joel Embiid is the entire reason behind all of their missed shots on the road, but I do think that his length is bothering them. He's contesting more shots. He's giving the Miami Heat shooters a little bit more to think about now as they're coming off screens, as they're trying to see the back of the rim. You got a huge 7'1" monster in the middle rising up, trying to contest the shot. I do think that starts to linger in the back of your mind. Obviously, he's clogging the middle, so he's forcing everything along the perimeter. But I just think that they've got no defense for him. He's a mismatch nightmare every single time down the floor, and he single-handedly changes the series. Now, obviously, Miami has home court advantage, so we'll see ultimately if it just comes down to whether they can make or miss shots. But the reason I say the Miami Heat are in more trouble than the Phoenix Suns is because tactically you have to make more adjustments. You have to make more changes to account for Joel Embiid's presence. Whereas with Phoenix and the Mavericks, right now what I've seen is the first two games versus the last two, Dallas's level of physicality has ratcheted up at home in those two games. But the main thing is you've got guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, Jalen Brunson, Davis Bertans, the role guys that played a lot better at home than they did on the road. And to me, when it comes to Philly and Miami, the actual X's and O's of the game are what change with Joel Embiid's presence. And I think that's, again, a bigger – now you have to look at this lens. You have to look through this telescope from a totally different perspective and alter the game plan completely. And so that's why, to me, I think Miami is a little bit more in trouble here because they really just don't have an answer, and they have to try and start from scratch with a game plan to take on this monster who's been introduced midway into the series. But again, there's no question that even Chris Paul's got to play better, and I think he will at home. I'm not too concerned about him. it really for me was Dallas's perimeter guys were making shots. They were able to create a little bit more space for Luka. Luka is playing a little bit more in check, but they're being a lot more physical. And that's allowed them to kind of get to the line, earn the whistle, and get Phoenix in foul trouble. But I think there are fewer changes for the Suns. It's more, hey, maybe we can start to shoot better. Mikal Bridges probably doesn't give you just 5 points in game 5 like he did in game 4. I just don't see that necessarily happen. So Phoenix is in a heap of trouble. There's no question about that. But again, between you have to assess the degree and the triage of worry, I'd give it slightly to Miami in this regard.